People who are, have been homeless, what was the first night without a home like, and how did you adapt to your new situation? I didn't really realize what was going on. I was about 6 to 7 at the time. Dad said we were going to go for a drive and to pack my backpack with all the clothes I could fit and one toy. Mom was just crying. Me and my brother sat in the back seat. He was a little older and was holding our Sega Genesis and looking scared. We drove for a little while. It was already getting dark, and we parked in front of a Walmart and Dad said he had to rest for a while. Was the first of many nights we slept in the car. I remember one of my parents was always awake, with their hand in their coat pocket. Looking back, it was obvious they had a gun for protection, sleeping in shifts. I was getting high, so it really didn't truly sink in until I was broke and dope sick. Then the desperation started. Going to gas stations, jumping car to car asking for money. Stealing what I had to. It was a miserable existence. There are so many things you don't think about when you're not homeless: taking a shower, washing your clothes, and the boredom. Hours upon hours of nothing to do. And the constant noise. There was nowhere to go where it was truly quiet. Fortunately, I eventually got arrested for shoplifting, reached out to family who helped me get back on my feet. I kept waking up in the middle of the night and would start walking home. I'd get a few steps, then stop and realize I had nowhere to go and turn and walk back over and lay on the ground. The ground is very cold and I felt a lot of shame. It was terrifying and cold and hungry. I didn't sleep a wink. I adapted over time. Extremely steep learning curve to surviving homelessness. Nothing really prepares you for it. I wasn't homeless to the extreme that some other guys I got to know who camped in the woods outside of town were, but I did a spell at a mission in town for a summer. The first night was pretty rough. I had been living with some friends after losing my place, but life caused them all to go separate ways, so one drove me to the mission and pretty much was like, "Okay, bye." The mission was your typical ultra-conservative Christian-ran shelter. The owners were hyper-aggressively masculine, to the point where they demanded your respect even while driving around in their brand new sports cars and treating you like dirt. The guys living there were a mix of ex-cons and drug addicts, but there were also some older gentlemen who were there simply because they were old and the government assistance wasn't enough. You have to adopt new ways of thinking amidst the less reputable side of that crowd. Learn how to keep people from stealing your stuff. Learn how to talk to people who are drugged senseless so they don't start beef with you. I pretty much spent that summer walking around town from dawn to dusk looking for a job. Pretty sure I applied at literally every business I could, updated with them regularly. Did my best to avoid picking up any addictions. A year later, I'm sitting in a rented house with a lovely girlfriend and a cozy desk job. And I'd rather die than go back to that hell. I have only been homeless for about 6 weeks, at 36 years of age. After several years of depression and anxiety slowly eroding my resources, relationships, and general will to try anymore, I ended up having a final blowout with my GF, who reasonably couldn't handle me anymore. I started sleeping at work, which wasn't even a full-time job. The delicacy involved in not getting caught, and the freedom from the extremely unhealthy state my relationship had been in, kept my mind away from the absolute, abject terror that was hiding beneath the surface. The scary part of homelessness for me was the growing sense that if I fell any further I'd probably never get back up. It takes resources to be clean, fed and rested, and if you aren't those things it's very hard to get resources, let alone find the will to try. But that first night was all triage, all focused on being sure the second night wasn't going to be on the street. I pulled it off for 6 weeks, and that time, actually, saved my life. I was away from conflict, intimately connected to how dire my circumstances had become, forced into a very regular schedule. Routine is really good for me but nigh impossible in a depressive state, and, without bills, was able to save enough for damage deposit and rent. I still struggle with depression in a pretty serious way, but the animal terror of having nowhere and no one really seared itself into me. A better motivation would be the future I want than the future I fear, but as it stands I at least have a motivator strong enough to escape the incredible gravity of mental illness. I lived at school until I dropped out due to a bunch of personal reasons piling up. My mom was mad that I dropped out and wouldn't even talk to me the first few days after, and my relationship with my father is complicated/non-existent. I took the train to my hometown, even though I didn't know what I would do or where I would go when I got there. I ended up staying the first night in my brother's room, not quite an apartment, just the one room with a kitchen and bathroom he shares with like 5 other people. After that, I posted to social media that I was in this unfortunate situation, and a friend I had lost touch with despite once being very close offered that I could stay with him and his fiancée until I got a place of my own. I never actually had to sleep outside, and I found an apartment after about 1 month, so all in all I was pretty lucky with how it turned out. Oh, and my mom and I are cool now, and my dad and I are also trying to rebuild our relationship after he finally divorced his no longer new wife. I've always referred to her as his new wife even though it's been over a decade. Earlier this summer we spent a month sleeping in my boyfriend's car. It was freeing not to be around people I hate, but I could only say that because I had the luxury of his car, with the windows covered at night, versus a shelter. It got very hot though, so we'd spend all day up until 10 or 11 outside of the car, showering at the gym and going to sleep in the hospital parking garage. He was working then, so we ate a ton of fast food. There were nights where he did sleep at the house and I slept in the car, not being welcome, so I begged for a blade for self-defense, thinking I was going to try to take some would-be attacker down with me. We are back on his parents' property now, but in the garage instead of the house. Honestly though, I still feel like I haven't had a home in the 6 years I've been living here, and my boyfriend hates it here too because of the aftermath of the conflict between myself and his brother's girlfriend. I get food and shelter, but I still feel kind of homeless. Well, for me it wasn't due to economic reasons. I was in a new town for work and had my wallet, car keys, and phone in my jacket. Went to a library to loan some books as I had nothing else to do. Left the jacket unguarded for 10 minutes and someone stole it. Had no access to any money, couldn't call almost anyone except my family, and it was 7 p.m. already and getting dark outside. Borrowed a phone and called my girlfriend, then my parents, and asked them to contact the company I work for and let them know what had happened and how they could contact me the next day. So I spent 2 nights without a roof because it took that much time to sort things out, mostly because I couldn't really prove who I was, so I couldn't access the things they helped set me up with. It sucks beyond belief. You can't sleep because it's too ducking cold, and there aren't any places to go either because everything is closed. I remember when McDonald's closed at 10 p.m. the first night. Jesus Christ, that was not fun, but I wasn't very hungry as I had had dinner before I went to the library. The second day I was tired as I hadn't slept. I was so cold as well. I thought we will sort this through today easily, but boy was I wrong. It took until 2 p.m. to get in contact with the company, and they really tried to help me. They set up an emergency account at a well-trusted bank, called them in the town I was in and said explicitly exactly what I looked like, what I was wearing, and that it was an emergency situation. Of course the bank didn't trust them, so when I went there they just said no. Being really hungry, I borrowed a phone again in the library, called the company and said what had happened, so they mailed me a credit card to the library, talked with some staff at the library to lend me some cash so I could eat until the credit card arrived. So had one more night to spend outside and haven't slept the first night at all. I managed to slumber for 10 to 30 minutes, woke up from the cold, had to start moving to build up some heat in my body, slumber a little bit more. When McDonald's opened at 7 a.m., I went there, bought breakfast and coffee and asked if I could sleep there for a while. After explaining my situation they agreed. Slept until 10 a.m., went back to the library and waited for the mail to arrive. Got the credit card and paid the person back with interest. I returned the double she had lent me. Because the gratitude you feel when they really ducking saved you from starving just a day is a very immense feeling. Used the credit card to rent a car, in the company's name, by having the place who rent out cars call the CEO of the company I work for so he would vouch for it. I drove home and started to get my life back on track. Driver's license, my own bank account, keys, phone, etc., etc., etc. We take these things for granted. Losing them all at the same time was hell. If you ever travel and get to a town you don't know people, be very careful about your things so it doesn't happen to you. The only thing I had was my clothes and shoes minus the jacket. But it did harden me. I'm more resilient now. So now I have lived out of a car for 2 weeks, for work because I couldn't find a cheap place to stay at, and I get 60% of the difference between what they have to pay for my residence in a new town and the actual cost of the residence I choose to stay at. Living out of a car is hard. There are so many things you take for granted that you lack: running water, toilet, shower and clean clothes. Just a place to eat that is your own place is something you will miss. If you plan on doing it, get a voltmeter, because I plugged my laptop into the car battery to charge it, then I spent an evening watching YouTube videos and stuff. The next day the car was dead because I had drained the battery. Went to a gym for shower but had to pay to use it, well, obviously. Here in Sweden we have no laundromats, so I had to use a dry cleaner to clean my clothes once. The worst part is that the chill really does creep into your car, so try to find a warm garage, or a sleeping bag. You have access to none of the things you take for granted. Electricity becomes something you begin to think very carefully about. Always have 2 bottles of water, one for drinking, the other for sanitation. Fill them up before you go back to the car for the night. Keep some toilet paper in the car at all times. It has more uses than merely wiping your butt. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.